This sucks. A notable high school senior, Daniel Winter, looked down, kicking at an errant rock on the sidewalk. He was thankful for the fact that he and his friends didn't live terribly far from school. Close enough, anyway, to make walking a viable option. His car was a bit of a beater, and while it usually ran fine, Daniel always feared it would still break down on him, thus he never bothered driving it unless he absolutely needed to. Besides, walking gave him time to think if he were alone or talk to his friends. Although given what the current subject of the conversation was about to be, he might have regretted talking to them at all in this instance. "Oh, come on, Daniel. Don't tell me you're going to start on this again," Lindsay Wilson replied, rolling her eyes. Evan, for his part, just laughed. "You expected Dan to not bitch? After a game?" He turned to Daniel, a large grin plastered on his face. "Dan, my man, for real. You're like clockwork." "Whatever," Daniel replied with a shake of his head. His friends were right, he thought to himself after arriving home. He did complain about his situation a little too much. However, he didn't care. Neither of them watched sports, really. Not like Daniel did. Sure, he probably couldn't give you all the reasons why one defensive scheme in basketball was better than another, or get into the nitty-gritty of every little baseball stat. But that didn't matter, as he always enjoyed just watching the games, rooting for his favorite teams and players, and generally having a fun time of it. The complaints, however, came from the fact that he himself was about as athletic as a box. He could barely dribble a basketball, he couldn't run very fast, and on top of it, he was a slight bit overweight. The source of his misery was, much like it was nearly every week, the basketball team. They weren't jerks and they didn't pick on him, mostly. But he was just the towel boy. No matter how much he wanted to toss on a uniform and run out on the court to sink a game-winning three-pointer, it'd never happen. Instead, he was stuck getting towels and water for the actual members of the team. Sure, they had crushed North Shore High today, but for Daniel, that was small consolation. After grabbing a quick pre-dinner bite to eat, he decided to get his mind off of his woes and head to one of the game stores at the mall, figuring he could at least browse the new releases for a while. Daniel sighed to himself as he exited the mall's third and final game shop. This little excursion hadn't really helped him. In fact, if anything, it had done nothing but reaffirm his foul mood, with the barrage of NBA and NFL and all other types of sports games seemingly taunting him. He proceeded to walk back towards the mall's entrance when a shop caught his eye. There were no windows or anything to show the inside of the small shop. Just a blacked-out door, as opposed to the rest of the open entrance stores. Most curious of all, however, was the wooden sign above the door that read, in old-style font, "Spells are US." This was a definite oddity, so, thinking it could perhaps lighten his mood, Daniel shrugged and headed for the store. The bell above the door sounded as Daniel opened it and stepped through. Inside, the shop was dimly lit with a bit of a musty smell to it. Daniel could see what looked to be magical or fantasy-related objects all around. Of course, he knew that these were fakes. After all, magic is the stuff of video games and fantasy novels. Most likely this was a place catered to the types of people who played Dungeons and Dragons or attended Renaissance fairs. "I get plenty of those types, yes," came a voice from behind Daniel, "but I assure you that my items are very much the real thing, and as such, my client base is rather large, you might say." Daniel, surprised, turned to see an old man in what appeared to be a gray bathrobe standing there. He had a calming grandfatherly appearance and his eyes twinkled in a kind, yet vaguely mischievous way. More shockingly, however, Daniel was sure that he hadn't seen anyone when he came into the store. And on top of that, he wasn't sure how this old man responded to something he hadn't said either. "To address your first concern," the old man started, seemingly without provocation, "well, you see all of my items. It's a bit easy to remain hidden among them. To address your second one, it helps having the mystical ability to peer into another's mind." Daniel wanted to protest. To make sure he was still sane, he felt he probably had to. Mind reading doesn't actually exist, after all. And yet, here is your proof to the contrary, Daniel? Asked the old man with a smile. Most people who come to my store are as in disbelief as you are, at least at first. I'm sorry, sir, Daniel said, his eyes lowering a bit. I didn't mean any disrespect or anything. It's just, well, I understand, Daniel, stated the old man. Everyone doubts that magic actually exists at first, but they all come around. Some quicker than others, but everyone does eventually. Seeing Daniel still looking at him a bit skeptically, the old man decided another demonstration was in order. Tell you what, I see that there is still a bit of doubt in your eyes. And I also see that you came here, hoping to distract yourself from your inability to play sports. Well, yeah. I guess, Daniel replied, rubbing the back of his neck. It just sucks. As much as I enjoy watching them, sometimes I just feel like I'd rather be playing. To see what it's like just one time, you know? And what if I told you I could help you achieve that goal? Asked the old man. Daniel laughed a little, despite himself. Unless you have a spell somewhere that will make me into the greatest athlete that's ever lived, I don't see how you could help Mr. Wizard, stated the old man simply. You can just call me Wizard. And I don't have something exactly like that, but I do believe I have something close enough. With that, the wizard walked around behind the counter and began rummaging. Daniel watched in amusement as the wizard dug around, muttering to himself. After a few minutes, the wizard finally stood back up, presenting an object to Daniel. Here we go, he said, handing it to the young man. What is it? Daniel asked, looking at it. It appeared to be an orb about the size of a baseball. A splattering of colors swirled around its surface constantly, a bit psychedelic looking, Daniel thought. That, my friend, is the orb of Siniska, explained the wizard. By holding it and imagining an athlete, the orb will absorb your spirit and then shoot it out where it will come to inhabit the body of whomever you had been picturing. And what happens to my body without a spirit? Asked Daniel, deciding to humor the old man. Nothing, actually, came the reply. It is possible for the physical and spiritual bodies to exist independently of each other, after all. It shall act as you would normally act. All right, and does this orb of Siniska travel with me? Daniel asked. I mean, how would I get back to my body? It's a simple enough matter, said the wizard. All you have to do is think about returning. One last question then, asked Daniel. Even if this does work, how am I supposed to actually be an athlete? It's still me running things, and I'm not going to know all the X's and O's. While you inhabit their body, you have full access to the mind, to everything they can do, answered the wizard. If you become a tennis player, for instance, you'd be able to successfully pass as them both on and off the court. The catch is that due to the breadth of information, it will take time to absorb it all. About 2 hours, possibly 3, in a body should do the trick. Daniel looked at the orb, contemplating what he should do. He didn't really believe in magic, of course. Yet this old man knew his name and could read his thoughts, so maybe there was a small chance this orb could help him. If not, he could always just give it to Evan's sister as a gift. He had a crush on her, and perhaps she might appreciate the orb enough to agree to go on a date with him. How much? He asked. For you, Daniel, I'm willing to sell it dirt cheap, stated the wizard. $20 should do just fine. After all, not only will it work, but you shall have gotten a great deal on it, as well. At the very least, that could lead to great word of mouth from you. Figuring he had the money to spare, Daniel paid the $20 the wizard had asked and exited the shop. On his way out to his car, Daniel took the orb out and looked it over. It didn't really look like much, he thought. Here's hoping the old man wasn't trying to rip him off. It was around 8 o'clock that night, and Daniel was sitting up in his room, watching a bit of television to pass the time. Hundreds of channels and still nothing good on, he complained, turning to Comedy Central for a little background noise. He looked over on his desk, to the spells or US bag. He hadn't bothered with the orb since coming home. After all, it was just a novelty item, right? Still, what if there were some truth in what the old man, a wizard he had claimed to be, had said? After all, becoming a baseball star or something would prove to be interesting. He went over and removed it from the bag, going back to sit on his bed. He held it tightly in his hand and, concentrating, brought up an image of Troy Anderson, the star and captain of Fremont High's basketball team. Daniel waited, and waited, and waited. To his dismay, though, nothing happened. He wasn't Troy Anderson. He was still awkward Daniel Winter. "I knew it," Daniel stated, a little defeated. "Oh well, at the very least this should make a good gift for Amanda." His words, however, were cut off. He felt a pull, a yank, really. For a brief moment he saw the same swirling, psychedelic colors that had been on the orb, and then he felt himself being shot forward. The world was a blur to him as he flew through the air. Trees and cars and houses passed him by at rapid speed. And for a brief moment he saw a girl in front of him. He was going too fast to make out what she looked like, but it appeared he was about to crash straight into her. Not knowing what else to do, he held out his hands and braced for impact. "Huh?" Daniel said to himself as the world came back to him. What the hell just happened? Something was strange, though. His voice just now had sounded odd, much higher pitched. And getting a better grasp on things, this definitely wasn't his room. It was larger and a little girlier. He noticed some posters of hot musicians and actors on the wall and the pink comforter on the bed. His head felt a bit weird, too, and going to touch it, he was instead greeted by much fuller hair. Surprised, he grabbed a handful of it and brought it into his line of sight. Gone was Daniel's short blonde hair, replaced with long, thick, dark brown hair. And that's when he noticed his chest, or rather what appeared to be on it, breasts. He had breasts. They weren't all that big, but it didn't matter because, breasts. Guys definitely didn't have them. Daniel looked around, hoping to catch sight of anything that could help him figure out what was going on. His answer came in the form of a dresser with a large mirror on it. Daniel ran over towards it, and what he saw shocked him. That pert nose, those piercing blue eyes, the long and dark hair, he'd recognize them anywhere. They belonged to Amanda Lewis. Daniel was now inside the body of Evan's sister. "What the fuck is going on?" he exclaimed to his reflection. "How did I end up?" He stopped himself, smacking his forehead. The orb! That wizard, he was telling the truth. But then how come I didn't become Troy? Why'd I become Amanda? Amanda, Evan's 17-year-old sister, was a cheerleader. She wasn't head cheerleader, that would be Stacy Lennox, but she was still a cheerleader, and thus she was still beautiful and popular. Unlike Stacy and her inner circle, though, Amanda was a little more down to earth. She didn't waste her time trying to put people in their place or basking in whatever attention was tossed her way. Cheerleading was considered a sport, so the fact Daniel became her when thinking about her wasn't too shocking. What was, however, was the fact he didn't become Troy. Remembering what the wizard had said, Daniel thought of his own self, and in an instant he was back inside his room, the television tuned to a different channel. Grabbing the orb off of his desk, Daniel proceeded to once more think about Troy. However, nothing happened. Trying once more, he thought about Kobe Bryant. Again, nothing. Shrugging, he thought about Amanda once more, and the same feeling as before came over him. Why the hell won't it work for Troy or Kobe, but it'll work for Amanda? He asked himself, staring at his reflection. Spotting Amanda's laptop on her desk, he turned it on, hoping he could find some information online about the Orb of Siniska. While he saw nothing about the orb itself, Siniska, he found, was the first woman to ever win an event in the ancient Greek Olympics. Daniel wasn't an idiot, and, putting two and two together, he was able to figure out that the orb only allowed him to become female athletes. He was a little disappointed. He knew nothing about women's sports, sans the fact that they were generally mocked for not being as good or entertaining as the male ones. Daniel resigned himself. He was limited to a type of athlete he generally knew nothing about. He had no real desire to hop from female athlete to female athlete either. Mostly, anyway. At the very least, he could use the orb to have a bit of fun as some of the cheerleaders. Maybe a couple of the players on the girls' basketball team as well, if he wanted to actually play. For the time being, he would resign himself to being Amanda. He might be able to learn enough about her to successfully ask her out, at the very least, so why not? Waking up the next morning was an odd experience for Daniel, to say the least. He had a whole flood of new information in his head. Amanda's, in fact. By the time he woke up, he knew everything about her, from what food she liked and how she put on makeup, to more intimate details, like her first kiss. Unfortunately, he couldn't find much of anything about himself in her mind. Seeing that he was just Evan's friend to her left him a bit disheartened. At the same time, though, as he stepped into the bathroom clad only in her robe, he realized it didn't matter much at this point. He had fantasized about being close to Amanda plenty of times, and as he caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror, he grinned knowing that at this moment, he was closer to her than he ever was in his fantasies. "Hey, so what do you say to a trip to the mall after school?" Brenda Davenport leaned over a bit, speaking to Daniel in a whisper as Mrs. Henderson babbled on about this and that, her nose buried in a history book as she talked. Brenda, Amanda's best friend, was a cute, perky, red-haired girl with freckles dotting her face around her eyes and nose. It gave her a bit of a youthful, innocent appearance, Daniel thought. "Well, I guess," Daniel replied, not really sure he would be able to say no to Brenda's shimmering, jade puppy dog eyes. "I don't have practice or anything today, so we should be good." "Great!" Brenda was practically radiant at that. "I kinda need to stop into Hollister and I didn't really want to go by myself." "Hollister?" Daniel asked, calling up some of Amanda's memories. "Oh, right. I knew it. You were just looking for an excuse to swing by and see if Jonathan was gonna be there. And you want me to come along because you were afraid you'd look like a stalker or something if you went in there by yourself." "Nuh-uh," came the reply. "I swear, I wanted to get some new shirts and I wanted someone to come along and make sure they look all right." "Because I'm such a fashionista, right?" Daniel asked, trying to stifle a laugh. Brenda in response made a face. "Oh, shut it. Will you girls please be quiet?" The sound of Mrs. Henderson's voice, much like her middle-aged face, is sharp, taking Daniel and Brenda by surprise. "Sorry, ma'am," is all either of them are able to mutter in response. "Good," replied Mrs. Henderson. Now, as I was saying, the French people had. By the time lunch rolled around, Daniel was becoming a bit disheartened. He knew now that Amanda really didn't like him all that much and it looked like getting her attention was basically out of the question. Though nice, Amanda was still a girl, and as such she only had eyes for the better-looking guys around campus, especially Dylan DeWitt, a member of the baseball team. Dylan was a tall guy with a lean, yet toned body, a perfect tan and a confident, easygoing expression permanently attached to his face. There was no way you could really compete with him. The day continued on and more, Daniel thought that staying as Amanda was a bust. He wasn't going to have a shot with her. If having her mind available hadn't been enough of an indication, the way she'd practically melt when passing Dylan in the halls was all you really needed to drive the point home. Being Amanda was just going to cause him more angst, and besides, he had gotten that orb to have a little fun. Going through the day, he decided to go back to that making mental notes of girls it might be fun to mess around as. Stacy was always a possibility, but other cheerleaders intrigued him more. There was also Tanisha Coleman, who was the star member of the girls' basketball team. As the school day ended and Brenda met Daniel by Amanda's car, she mentioned that she had signed up to play in the upcoming Powder Puff football game, and Daniel wondered if this made her enough of an athlete to try the orb on her at some point. Later on at the mall, Daniel followed through on his word of helping Brenda pick out a couple of new shirts that he admitted definitely looked nice on her. As much as his day spent as Amanda had been a blow to Daniel's confidence, he had to admit he really liked hanging around Brenda. She was a bit scatterbrained and talkative, but it was a bit endearing, he thought. Their time at the mall, however, was sadly shorter than Daniel would have liked, and after dropping Brenda off at her house, he headed back to the Lewis and, wasting little time, headed back into his own body after going up to Amanda's room. Daniel's own body had just gotten done helping out the basketball team's practice and was about halfway home by the time he re-entered. A couple minutes later he arrived home, only to hear his mother and younger sister Cassie arguing. "You're not quitting and that's that," his mother snapped. "Why not?" Cassie asked, a bit of a whine to her voice. "I don't really like it anymore, and I have, no free time now. I haven't gotten a chance to hang out with Lauren in like a week." "I don't care," Ms. Winter replied. "If you don't want to do it next year, fine, but in this family we don't quit. Especially just because we don't like something. If you quit one thing, you're just going to wind up quitting everything else with flimsier excuses each time. So you're not quitting, and that's final." "God, you're so unfair," Cassie exclaimed before storming off upstairs to her room. "Hey Mom, what's the problem?" Daniel asked afterwards. "Oh, Daniel. Sorry, I didn't hear you come in," Ms. Winter said, apologizing to her son. "It's Cassie. She wants to quit the soccer team. I told her no and, well, I guess you caught the tail end of that, huh?" Daniel's mother sighed before adding, "I understand that she doesn't like not seeing her friends, but I told her to just finish out this season. Besides, they've got a game tomorrow and she's their best player. How will it look if she just up and quits?" Daniel gave a shrug. "Maybe it's all the hormones," he said jokingly, his mother giving him a cut-that-out-looking response. "I'll talk to her, she'll listen to me." With that, Daniel headed upstairs to his room, and as he saw the orb sitting on his dresser, an idea came over him. If Cassie didn't want to play tomorrow, then he'd just go in her place. The thought of becoming his sister was weird, Daniel thought, but by doing so he'd kill two birds with one stone. His sister wouldn't quit the team and he'd finally get a chance to do something athletic. Gripping the orb, he concentrated, and the now familiar feeling swept over him. Soon Daniel found himself in another room. A familiar one across the hall, laying on a bed with a large white comforter. He gave a quick glance at the mirror sitting on the desk on the other side of the room to confirm everything had worked. It had. He was now Cassie Winter. Daniel was now his sister. "So how'd the talk with your mom go?" Lauren asked Daniel as they sat on the bus that would take them to Lockman Middle School. Daniel, trying to play the part of his sister, just shot an annoyed glance back in Lauren's direction. "I'm still wearing the uniform, right?" he asked. "Yeah, tough break," Lauren replied with a bit of a wince. In an almost resigned motion, Daniel shrugged his shoulders. "I shouldn't worry about it, I guess. She said I can leave the team after the season anyway, and that's only, 5 more games." "That's not what you said yesterday," came the reply, Lauren eyeing her friend with a bit of suspicion. "I just don't really see a point in arguing with her," Daniel stated. "I'm not gonna get through to her at all. Besides, I guess I should be glad that I'm at least good at something." "Yeah, not like your brother," Lauren said, a grin on her face. Daniel gave her a glare out of the corner of his eye that he wasn't sure if she caught. He always thought Lauren was a bit of a brat. "It's not his fault he's not athletic," Daniel shot back, rising to his own defense. "I'm sure if he had the skill, he'd be good at basketball or baseball." "Oh come on," Lauren said with a roll of her eyes. "He's a dork. I know he's your brother and all, but it's true. Why do you always have to talk about him like that?" Daniel asked. It's not like he did anything to you. Lauren, seemingly unable to think of a reply, just stared. Daniel thought he saw a bit of uneasiness on her face, but he wasn't really sure what emotion it actually was. That expression was brief, however, and Lauren just smiled. Forget it. Sorry. So, how do you think you did on that homework for Mr. Schultz's class? It was later on in the evening and Daniel couldn't stop his borrowed heart from racing. Sure, it was a middle school soccer game, but still he was finally going to be able to do something, and with his sister's body and skills, he'd be able to look like the star he always wanted to be. After stretches and the coach's pregame speech, Daniel jogged his way out onto the field, cries of "Good luck, Cass," and such from Cassie's teammates following him. And then it was showtime. Throughout the game, Daniel dribbled and passed like an expert, faking out the girls on the other team, causing them to fall on their faces. Cassie was fast and wiry, and Daniel found it easy to use her speed and agility to slip past defenders. Using Cassie's mind, he was always able to get the ball in the right position for a teammate to score a goal, and at one point, after being wide open due to a spectacular maneuver to evade an opposing player, Daniel let loose and sent the ball firing past the goalie and into the net. This was going better than Daniel thought. He was showing up the other team, making them look completely silly. Cassie's athletic ability, combined with Daniel's determination and drive, had made Cassie Winter an absolutely unstoppable force, until an opponent slid, trying to get the ball, and instead hit Daniel's foot, causing him to fall head over heels, and one of those heels to land rather awkwardly. Pain shot up through Daniel and he instinctively grabbed at his ankle. It was a minute or two before one of the assistants came out to the field and helped him to the locker room to examine it. Daniel came out of the locker room a bit later on a pair of crutches, his sister's, ankle bandaged. He was a bit surprised to see his mother and, well, himself there to greet him. "Oh, Cassie, I'm sorry," exclaimed Ms. Winter. "How's your ankle?" "It's fine," Daniel answered, undoing the ponytail Cassie's hair had been in, a mess of blonde hair flying in his face as he shook his head. "It's just a sprain. They said it'd be fine in like a week." "Well, that's good," Ms. Winter stated. "I'm sorry for yelling at you earlier about the team. I really shouldn't be pushing you to do something you don't want to do." "Mom, it's fine, don't worry," replied Daniel. "It's just a small sprain. And anyway, after talking to Daniel and then playing out there, it was like, I dunno, I felt better about soccer than I ever have." After saying that, however, Daniel mimed dizziness. Can we get back to home though? I'm feeling dizzy." With that, Daniel concentrated and found himself back in his body in time to see Cassie wobble unsteadily before pulling herself back together. For his part, Daniel straggled a bit behind his mother and sister, and looking directly at Cassie he smirked. "Good job," he said, to himself more than Cassie. "You were awesome. God, that routine during halftime sucked." Amanda practically spat the last word out. It was a little over a week later, a Monday. During that time Daniel had come to use the orb more, at this point usually only going back to this body to make a leap into someone else. During this time he had jumped into Cassie again just to go through a practice, ran a cross-country race as Anita Hudson, tore up the court as Tanisha, and jumped into Lindsay, who was on the volleyball team, just because he'd always been a bit curious about seeing her naked. He'd even become a few of the cheerleaders and, during that time, had more or less gotten over his crush on Amanda. For the last day or two, though, he had been inside Maya Castillo, another cheerleader. Maya was a girl of Dominican origin, though she had been living in America since middle school. She was a girl who, while not having the biggest breasts or ass, had an incredibly fit, firm body and the face of an angel. He noticed it while in Linda Stroman, the youthful beauty of her face and the way her large brown eyes practically drew him in. And so, having wasted little time, Daniel jumped into her. It was a jump he had been enjoying so far. "Right, Maya?" came Linda's voice. "Maya? Hello." "Oh, Sorry, Daniel replied in Maya's lightly accented voice. Kinda spaced out. Yeah, really, Linda said. I was just telling Amanda not to get upset about the routine not being up to snuff because Stacy's gonna ride our asses anyway. Well, yeah, no shit, Amanda replied. But because it wasn't perfect, she's gonna give us double the crap over it. She gives us double the crap no matter what. Daniel said, chiming in, nothing's ever perfect in her eyes. See? Maya's got Linda's reply was interrupted by Brenda approaching the group's table. Hey, Amanda, she asked. I know it's short notice and all, but I was wondering if you'd be able to give me a lift up to the mall after school. I kinda need to. Sorry, Brenda, Amanda said, interrupting her, but Stacy's gonna chew a couple of us out after school over the halftime routine from Friday, and Linda and me decided to take the fall to get the others off the hook. Oh, well, no. It's just I've got a job interview at that one clothing store, the one across from Hollister, and I needed a ride up there. I'll take you up there, Daniel jumped in, leaving everyone to turn to him oddly. What? I'm right here, I've got a car and I've got nowhere else to be, he said with a shrug of his shoulders. Thanks. I don't know where you park, so just, let's meet up here after last period, alright? And with that, Brenda was off on her way. Hey, so thanks for taking me up here, Brenda said between bites as the two of you sat in the food court. I never really bothered to talk with the cheerleaders, so yeah, I was kinda surprised you offered the ride. It was nice of you, though, thanks. Don't worry about it, Daniel replied, shaking his head. I mean, I don't really know you too well, but I wasn't about to see you lose a job opportunity just 'cause you couldn't get a ride. Oh well, I don't know if I even would have lost it if I didn't get up here, she said. Like the interview was basically just like, hey, here's what you're gonna be doing, here are the rules, show up on Saturday at noon. Like a formality? Daniel asked. Yeah, exactly, Brenda replied, looking up from her food a bit sheepishly. Don't think I was trying to trick you into giving me a ride or anything. I mean, I could have called them if I couldn't make it, I guess, but I just would have rather gotten up here today and, you know. Like I said, don't worry, Daniel said reassuringly. You needed help and I figured I'd help you out. No big deal. Besides, it's been nice getting to know you. I don't really get why Amanda's never bothered really introducing us to you. I dunno, Brenda said with a shrug. Like I think she likes to keep her cheerleading life and her non-cheerleading life separate, you know? Still, though, you think it would have come up at least, Daniel stated. Well, no point in worrying, said Brenda. It's not like we're gonna be able to change her. Agreeing, the two finished their food and went to do a bit of window shopping. Brenda tried on a couple of different shirts and jeans, lamenting that she didn't have the money to spend on some new clothes right now, no matter how good they looked on her, and they definitely did, Daniel had to admit, as more than once he felt his face get a little hot when she's come out in a particularly low-cut top or a pair of jeans that maybe were a smidge too small. Surprisingly enough, during their journey through the mall, Daniel found it odd that the store where he had originally gotten the orb from was seemingly nowhere in sight. Then again, it was a small, rather innocuous place, and Daniel was more interested in Brenda, both in what she was saying and how she looked, that he just chalked it up to him not paying too much attention. Finally, the pair left the mall and Daniel drove Brenda home, after asking her for directions if only to keep up appearances. Pulling into Brenda's driveway, she again thanked him for the ride and for hanging out with her, saying that she really enjoyed it. Echoing the sentiments, Daniel looked at her face again. She really was cute. And sweet. Daniel had really enjoyed spending time with her, both as Amanda and as Maya. And so, letting his emotions get the better of him, Daniel leaned over and kissed her. Brenda, for her part, was shocked, but not for a second did he feel any sign of resistance or reluctance from her. It was a short kiss, though one that, to Daniel, seemed to last much longer. Finally, he pulled away and both him and Brenda looked around sheepishly. Wow. Brenda said nervously. I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. Brenda just shook her head. I've gotta go. With that, Brenda exited the car and was inside seemingly in an instant. As soon as Daniel got back to Maya's house, he went to her room, threw himself on the bed and silently cursed himself over what an idiot he had been. The next few days at school were definitely awkward. Anytime Daniel tried to go up to Brenda and talk to her, she promptly avoided him. He even tried jumping back into Amanda and asking if something was bothering her, but she was silent about it. It wasn't until Thursday, the day of the powder puff game, that Daniel was struck with the idea to use the orb. As the game was nearing its end and Brenda was sitting on the bench, Daniel jumped back into his original body and grabbed the orb off the dresser. He wasn't sure how loose the definition of athlete was to the orb, but he figured if Brenda was involved in something athletic, then that might be enough to be able to jump into her and figure out what was going on. So concentrating, he thought of Brenda, and once more he felt the familiar feeling of flying through the air, zooming over the city at light speed. And in a flash he was sitting on a bench at the school's football stadium. He noticed a pair of average-sized breasts under a maroon shirt. He, much like the first time he jumped into Amanda, pulled some hair into his line of sight, red hair. It worked! He was Brenda! The game soon ended and Daniel wasn't sure what to do. It would be few hours until Brenda's mind was completely open to him, so he was stuck as her for a little bit. He looked down at his breasts and gave them a quick squeeze. Well, he was in Brenda's body, and much like Lindsay, the temptation was there to see the entire thing. Though he felt far too strongly about Brenda to actually do it. He knew it was wrong, placing his friend seemingly beneath a girl he barely knew, but Daniel felt as if he'd be defiling her or betraying her if he fooled around while in her body. And that's when Amanda surprised him by coming up to him to congratulate Brenda on her performance in the game. "Thanks," Daniel replied, a bit absent-mindedly. This was something that wasn't lost on Amanda. "Are you all right?" she asked. "You've been acting a bit weird the last couple of days." "Oh, well, it's just that I was with someone, right? And, we were talking and they just kinda, kissed me," Daniel said, trying his best to sound like Brenda. "Kissed you?" Amanda asked, a look of astonishment on her face. "Oh, who was it?" Daniel, however, just shook his head. "I'm not naming names or anything. I've just been kinda confused since it happened because, I might like them, but I don't know, and everything just happened so fast and I dunno." "Well, whether you like them or not, just be honest about it," Amanda replied. "Don't blow them off or lead them on or anything. Just tell them how you feel." For a moment Daniel just looked at her, then smiled and embraced her in a friendly hug. "Thanks, Amanda," he said. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "Hey, don't worry about it," she replied as the two of them released the hug. "You're my best friend, after all. By the way, you want to go grab a quick bite to eat and hang out?" Looking, Daniel noticed Maya milling around the parking lot. Probably headed back out to her car, he figured. But seeing her, and taking into account what Amanda had said, Daniel knew what he had to do. "No," he replied, shaking his head, deciding to make up a bit of a lie. Coach wanted to talk to us about a couple of things first. I guess she wanted to congratulate us on a good game or something. I'll catch up with you some other time, though." After Amanda left, Daniel looked over at Maya one last time. He just needed to make one more jump. If everything worked out, this would probably be the last one he did. Sure, he might use the orb once in a while for a bit of fun on the side, but to use it like he had been? Well, he thought, he'd have no more reason to. And so, one last time, he went back into his original body and then leapt into Maya. Quickly looking around, he spotted Brenda and ran over to her. "Oh, Maya." "Hi," she said, looking around a bit nervously. Daniel sighed. "I'm sorry about what happened before. The whole kiss thing, he apologized. It's just, I like you. I really do. Just talking to you, you're so nice and sweet and pretty, and it's just that all that kinda came flooding in at once and I wasn't thinking. Daniel looked down now, speaking a bit quieter. God, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to make you upset or anything. Are you kidding? Brenda asked, taking Daniel by surprise. I'm the one who should be sorry. I shouldn't have been avoiding you. I should have told you what was going on with me, but I needed, some time to think. Like after you did that, I just had so much crap going through my head and sorting it all out was hard. She looked straight ahead at Daniel, now a smile on her face. But like a little bit ago, I came to a bit of an, I dunno, like a revelation? While I was on the bench it just kinda became clear to me how I felt. And, how's that? Daniel asked, butterflies in his stomach. Brenda answered him by grabbing him and giving him a good, long kiss. For Daniel, time practically stopped. Everything was perfect, until the wolf whistles and shouts came up. The pair pulled away, looking redder than tomatoes. Still, Daniel looked over at Brenda and knew that everything was going to work out. Sure, now he had the athletic skills he had always dreamed of, but more importantly, he had someone to share his joy with. And elsewhere in the school's parking lot, an old man wearing a gray hat and a long gray overcoat watched two girls holding hands step into a car and drive off. To where, he knew not, but he knew that once again, his items were responsible. Once again, he had brought happiness to the life of someone who desperately needed it. And smiling to himself, he was gone in a bright flash of light. Man, where'd Daniel get this tacky thing? Evan Lewis was sitting in his room, palming an orb, staring lazily in its shifting multicolored form. He had seen it in Daniel's room on Friday and asked him what it was. Daniel didn't answer him, and so, wanting to check it out, Evan decided to borrow it while Daniel had gone to use the bathroom. On his way out of Daniel's house, he had run by Daniel's sister Cassie, who sheepishly greeted him. Evan knew about Cassie's not very subtle crush on him, though too bad for her, she was a good 5 years too young. Still, she's a nice girl, Evan said to himself. Maybe if she were a few years older, she'd have a shot. Looking at the orb in his hand, he continued, wonder what she's up to right now. Down the street, a now very confused Cassie Winter was grabbing at herself, her chest, her hair, everything. Running from the backyard, she blew past her mother and into the bathroom, locking the door behind her. Catching sight of herself in the mirror, she touched her face, not able to believe what she saw. She stuttered. And then, as realization set in, her lips twisted into an uncharacteristic smirk. Sweet.